Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. A little housekeeping before we get started with the discussion. We have some time set aside at the end of the webinar for your questions, so please use the chat box to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will also be launching a few polls, so please engage so that we can get your feedback. Aduro is a SHRM recertification provider, and this presentation qualifies for 1 professional development credit. The activity code for this webinar will be displayed at the end of the program. Now, I'll pass the mic over to today's host, Renee Petrie.
So welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We want to thank everyone in the live audience as well. My name is Renee Petrie, and I lead product and innovation at Aduro. And the topic that we're focusing on today is building strategies to support the mental health of your employees. We're going to hit on a couple of different topics during this webinar. We're going to start by talking about some of the mental health trends in the workplace, and then we're going to talk for a few minutes about some of the barriers to providing and seeking support. We'll talk about strategies for building a supportive culture, and then we'll wrap up the webinar with some thoughts on the future of mental health, and we'll save time as well to take some questions from the audience. And so before I take a moment to introduce the speakers, I want to define mental health and really set the stage for the conversation today. One of the things that we know is that we hear the terms mental health and mental illness really being used interchangeably, but they're not. When we think about mental health, we think about it on a continuum. We have individuals who are mentally healthy. We've got folks who might be struggling with an issue or situation, and then we have folks who are dealing with mental illness or mental disorder. And so we're here today because I think we all believe that mental health is something that touches all of us, either directly or indirectly, and it's really, really important to bring the topic of mental health into the conversation. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speakers. And so I'm joined today by Selena Cobell. Selena is the wellbeing director at Sequoia Consulting Group. She's responsible for needs assessment, vendor selection, strategy, planning, rollout support for client wellbeing programs. Selena has spent 10 years in the total reward sector. She was recognized as one of EBA's 2017 most influential women in benefits advising for her innovative and more holistic approach to well-being. She's spoken on various panels, including South by Southwest, and she also serves on the Advisory Council for Bring Change to Mind, which is a nonprofit dedicated to encouraging dialogue about mental health. So welcome, Selena.
Thanks
for joining us.
Excited to be here.
So first of all, I just want to ask you a question. Can you tell me a little bit about your work at Sequoia and what you've learned about well-being that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, and so the work we do at Sequoia, it's been really interesting. So one of the challenges when we go in and try to help one of our clients figure out what their strategy is going to be, the vendors that they're going to use, where to even start, we found that the biggest challenge tends to be exactly that, is that there are so many different options, and it can be really hard to decide between conflicting interests of employees, or what program to start with first and then what to go to. You kind of want to do everything, but you can't. And so as we think about our pillars of well-being at Sequoia, ours are physical health, emotional health, financial health, and then we've kind of bucketed family planning and programs into one bucket with a really broad definition of family. And so oftentimes we'll find people like wanting to just focus on their financial strategy or just focus on physical first and then get to the other stuff. And what we're finding, and I think is a really important thing to take note of as we go through this topic today, is that really when you kind of think about it, well-being from the mental health standpoint isn't its own pillar so much as it is the arch that goes over all those areas and intertwines with all of them. So if you are trying to focus on your nutrition or fitness goals, it can be stressful to get there. If you're trying to buy a home or start a family, that can be stressful. And so if you kind of look through the lens of mitigating stressors, that's really where we find the most success. So I think I'd urge everyone to just kind of take that lens as we go through the program and just think about all different ways that if you just focused on stress, you really could touch on it all.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that lens to
Yeah.
the conversation. Our other guest is Carolyn Bayer-Azoff. Carolyn is our Senior Director for Health Programs at Aduro. Thank you for joining us, Carolyn.
Thanks, Renee.
Carolyn brings a decade of experience in employee health, well-being, and engagement in the workplace. She leverages her background in counseling and health psychology to really champion a whole community, whole person approach to unlocking the potential of individuals. And she really champions this concept of mental health as universal and foundational. Outside of the office, Carolyn loves to spend time with her fun-loving husband. She has a new smiling baby and a very energetic puppy. So with all of that going on, thank you for carving out and joining us today.
Absolutely. Mental health is an important topic for me to talk about as well.
Well, let's get started on that right away. Tell me a little bit about your work and what inspired you to suggest that we host this webinar today, focusing on mental health.
Yeah. First of all, thank you everybody for joining online, and it's fun to have a live audience here today. Mental health is too often looked at as an individual kind of problem. And in my experience, in my background in counseling, as well as working with clients on engagement, this type of kind of you problem approach is really it's isolating. It's siloed, and it's not doesn't have the impact that it can. And so, where I see a big opportunity, and I'm excited to talk to you two about today, is the opportunity for individuals and organizations to really take an inclusive approach, a approach that really spans the full continuum of mental health and in a preventative way and has human connection at the center. And so culture, we're going to talk about stigma, we're going to talk about all of that today, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I'm really excited to get this conversation going. Before we do jump into the meat of the conversation, I just want to take a moment for those of you who may not be familiar with Aduro to introduce you to us. So Aduro, we say we're a human performance company. We really, as our mission, we really focus on unlocking the potential of employees. And we do that using our platform, which we call Aduro Connect, which focuses on offering human connection, expert coaching, interactive content, and personalized insights to really deliver this engaging and intuitive experience for the employees that use our products. And we also really focus on partnering with our clients, right? So it's not just about delivering technology, but partnering really closely with our clients to help bring this into their overall culture and enhance the culture that really promotes holistic development and flourishing of employees, both at work, but also in life. So we're excited to have this conversation. Let's go ahead and get started.
We'd like to take a moment just to bring the audience into the conversation a little bit. And so what we're going to do right now is just ask a poll question, which you should see on your screen. And that question is, does your organization have a strategy in place to promote the mental health of your employees? So we'd like all of you just to take a moment to answer that question. It's just a quick yes or no response. So we'll pause just for a second, give you a chance to log your answer. All right, great. So it looks like we've got several responses coming in. And right now it looks like is that 69%? 65%, thank you, can't quite see it. So 65% of the audience has indicated that they do have a strategy in place for promoting mental health. So we're really anxious or interested in having you, as you're hearing some of the things that we talk about today, sort of reflect on the strategies that you have in place. And hopefully we have a couple of new ideas to offer to you. So, the first thing that we really want to kind of talk about is mental health trends, right? And I think we all know the statistics. There's 1 in 5 Americans today is actually actively dealing with mental illness. I think it's 44% of adults have said that their feelings of stress have actually increased over the last 5 years. And I think this is something that we also hear, from our clients each and every day. And so I think we want to start there. So maybe, Carolyn, we can kick off with you. And I'd like to know, why do you think that addressing mental health in the workplace is important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, if we just look at how much time we spend at work, we spend a third of our time in the day at work 5 days a week. And people don't check their mental health at the door. Also, employers are continuing to really think about that integrated experience, work and life, and how they can support the total employee life experience. And mental health just fits naturally into that equation. And also when employers think about, where they stand in society. I mean, mental health directly impacts not just the employee, but also their family and the community in which they live. And so that's one reason. And like a lot of things where employers invest in their people, of course, there's also the business impact. And so, things like productivity, absenteeism, presenteeism, there's 200 million lost workdays a year that due to mental health conditions. Also burnout, right? The World Health Organization just late last year really called out burnout as a workplace phenomenon to really focus in on. There's an increase in sick days taken. They're more likely to be looking for new jobs. And so definitely, the bottom line for the employer. And then that's not to mention just what is the potential that's left on the table if people are not promoting their mental health. So creativity, their ability to cope with stress, the daily stresses of work, how they're really showing up for society as well. So both, there's a great potential to support individuals, their families, their communities, as well as support the organization.
Perfect. So we saw that about 65% of our audience said that they were taking action, around mental health. What are some of the things that you're seeing other companies do to take action?
Yeah, actually, I think about Starbucks right down the street here from Maduro headquarters. They were already offering mental health resources through their EAP, and they listened to their employees. And Kalina, I know this is something that you feel really strongly about as well, is they listened. What are the gaps? What additional support would the employees need? And they ended up doing a few things. One is they actually leveraged a kind of an all hands with store managers. And they partnered with a mental health first aid, which is a great organization to check out, and did train 2 focus sessions for their managers on the mental health first aid, how to detect signals and support people who are experiencing mental health struggles. Also for their employees, they partnered with Lady Gaga's organization and also a veterans nonprofit and a meditation app to make sure that they had tools to really support their mental health, not just in times of kind of acute mental illness, but also upstream more proactively. And what I love about Starbucks' approach, and then we can move on, is how they did it, right? They did not just deliver the resources, here they are. They listened. The CEO was behind it in the delivery from the top down. And also they evaluated the environment in which employees were working at the same time to make sure that it was supportive so that those resources could really be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I also love the activation of the managers in that equation because I think that's a really interesting opportunity as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And so Kalina, I'll turn to you. With the knowledge that mental health issues are really prevalent, that they're actually can be very expensive for employers, what are you hearing from your clients on this topic?
Yeah, definitely. So I have the advantage kind of being in more of the broker consulting world of actually seeing the true impact of how people are using their insurance as it relates to a lot of the mental health topics, both how they're using and not using and the impact that has. So, we are finding an astronomical amount of mental health related claims. And the interesting thing is when you work with an employer on that, at first they might think, oh, it's this crisis and everyone's going through this really intense thing. And then you start looking at the pharmaceuticals and things behind it, and people are taking things like Adderall and Xanax and a lot of drugs that have just been there to help people have the energy and to sleep and to get through what they need to. And so I think a lot of it actually ties back into how HR has to respond to that and be part of it. And so something that's kind of interesting, and I know Carolyn kind of went down the same route, but I had actually gone to school to be a therapist and thought that was the route I was going to go. And in talking with friends, would you see a therapist? Like, have you ever gone to therapy? You saw the common themes of, no, it's too expensive. No, it's too hard to find a therapist. No, I wouldn't even know where to start. And so I asked them, well, when you need resources or you have some mental health or you want to know how to find a therapist, who do you go to? And the answer was HR. And so I'm sure a lot of you that are in the audience might relate to that in terms of you are essentially the office therapist, and that a lot of people are coming to you with these issues that historically most employers haven't had to deal with or chose not to deal with. And so it's opening this entire new world that industries have to tackle and try to find the right resources. And so I think really what we're seeing is a huge need for that preventive care to find the right solutions for things. I mean, a great example is most offices, if you all of a sudden had a fire, you'd know where to go because you do office fire drills and instructions are posted and it's really clear. But when someone goes through a mental health episode or something like that happens at the company, we often find HR coming to us in almost a panic saying, like, we don't know where our resources are, we don't know the right links, like, what do we do, what's out there? And so we've really urged, and I think this is becoming the next trend, is to have that proactive plan in place, to know where your resources are, to have scripts you can give managers so they know how to have those conversations, make it part of management training. I think that companies are really going to shift to know that this is going to be part of their business and how they structure everything from those drills to just being part of their culture.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're hearing that it's actually, resonating with and actually coming from the employers that you're working with.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So that might be a nice segue to kind of talk a little bit about barriers to care, right? So, Colleen, I'll ask you again. So what are some of the barriers that you're hearing from employers? Why aren't employees accessing or utilizing the services that are available to them?
Yeah, so I think the big thing here is just most people don't identify with having a mental health issue. Like if I was to even look around this room or just directly walk up to someone and say, do you have a mental health issue? That's not really the way that we go about talking about this. So it's interesting that we call and the term is mental health, but that's not so normalized. Now, at the same time, if I went around the room and said, are you stressed? Has anything made you anxious over the past week? Do you just feel like a weight's on your shoulder? It'd probably be a resounding sense that that's happened at least once during that time period. And so I think for us, a lot of the barriers have been that it's really difficult to frame and market the resources in the right way that destigmatize them and makes them be there with the types of resources that are kind of more resonating. So as you guys see, this concept of like misconceptions and stigmas is really something that we have to target. So as a perfect example, when we were working with a client and back to the gathering feedback from employees, we had a client who did a survey and she was asking people, would you like more help in the following resources? And a lot of people indicated like, yes, I would love some more support with mental health. It was an anonymous survey, so it was a great way to gather that. So she said, I'd love to bring a therapist on site and do a mental health workshop. I think that would resonate really well with the audience. And so she did that and crickets. No one came, not a single person. And I'm sure for any of you in the audience too, that sort of thing resonates no matter what topic where people wanted something, you do it, no one comes. It's very frustrating. So she came to me and said, what do we do? Like people want this and they said they'd go to workshops, but they're not attending the mental health one. So we kind of looked at the other results in the survey, things like some of the other stressors, and we saw things like parenting, financial wellness, different things like that. And so a lot of what we started to do was, okay, what if we did a workshop, again, to my point at the beginning, that target that source of stress and kind of helped that area of their mental health. And so we did a financial workshop, essentially called Ask a Financial Expert. And someone came in and talked about all of the things that can stress you out, planning for life events, parenting, and people started opening up and venting. And then the feedback she got was, it's so helpful that you offer resources that help make me less stressed, which is the whole goal of the original session. So I think it's just a lot of
kind of how you package it,
exactly.
Right?
It's totally how you package it.
And I think it's also how you live it, right?
Yeah.
Because to your first point, it's not, you don't show up to talk about that one issue. It's throughout your life.
Totally.
And your work, so that's really important. So Carolyn, same question for you. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as barriers to utilizing mental health services?
Yeah, I think that we have to talk about stigma, right? In society, we thankfully have seen the stigma lifting. We're seeing influencers talk about their mental health struggles. We're seeing it in the media. And actually, it's being talked about in in mental health in the workplace, how organizations support people in their mental health. And that's a really great thing. And I'm excited about that momentum. However, the stigma still remains in the workplace and it's magnified. Both, if an employee is struggling with their mental health, how will that be perceived in terms of my performance or my ability to, to be promoted or to, excel in the company. Managers and leaders, how the confidence in terms of supporting their team and talking about mental health, it's still, there's discomfort there. And so, 60% of people have never talked about their mental health with anybody at work. That includes their coworkers, their managers and supervisors, and that just really highlights the importance. And again, you can offer as many mental health resources and tools as you want, but if the environment and the culture does not support it, they're only going to be able to go so far.
Yeah. So let's continue to drill down on that. Again, Kalina, maybe you can talk a little bit about what would be some advice that you would give to employers about how they can encourage employees to better utilize the resources they already have available?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is we definitely encourage HR people to use it or try that process themselves. I think you always hear about how it's hard to explain something to someone unless you yourself understand it. And so I think it's always surprising, and I would even be curious how many people on this webinar have done this, but have you ever tried to call the EAP? And, people know that their utilization's low and they know it's not great, but if you've ever actually tried to call it, and I always encourage HR to do this, is you start to get insight into what that process looks like, so that if someone needs it, you can walk through and say, hey, it was really easy. Here's what I did. This is what I reached out to. This was the turnaround time. If you need something faster, this is what I would go with. So I think that concept of trying to use it yourself so you can better explain it's really important. The second with resources is I also try to talk to making things timely, and so this concept of awareness days I think is really important. And so, for example, in May you have Mental Health Awareness Month, June's Men's Health Month. There's so many days that every marketer from cars to sports is catching in on, and so your employees are hearing about that. So if you're providing those resources at that time, it's going to sink in a little bit more than it might if it's randomly set. So we try to think about those as well. And then last thing I would just say is, just tell a story. So I think to the point of the Starbucks example you gave, it's really great when CEOs or leadership get up there and actually tell a story. When we rolled out mental health at our own company, the CEO sent it out, but then it got brought up again at the management training, and we trained managers how to use it, and we talked to employees about it again. And then I even got up and shared my own story, hey, I wanted to go to a therapist. I didn't really feel like I had anything crazy deep in the spiderwebs to talk about, but I was just stressed and I wanted someone to vent to and to hear me and to give me resources. And so I did it. And I encouraged anyone in the room who was feeling stressed to just hop in a conference room and try it themselves. And so I think anyone just sharing that example is really helpful.
That's fantastic. Carolyn, maybe bringing it home a little bit in the context of what we do here at Aduro, what comes to mind for you in terms of how we can bring awareness to mental health within a well-being program?
I think that actually just part of that question in terms of within a well-being program, mental health isn't its own bucket. It's not, health, well-being, and mental health. Mental health spans across every part of an employee's, a person's health, well-being, flourishing. And so integrating it into programs that are already in place. I know we have, for example, programs for expecting parents, for new parents, also my personal life experience.
You can relate to that one.
And you're going to, help support somebody in that experience and not support them in their mental health, you're really missing a big part of the equation. And same with financial well-being. You had the example of the on-site. Somebody might come to enroll in a program or be working with a coach on a financial well-being goal, but if there's underlying stressors, anxiety that comes out, that's going to get in their way of their forward progress towards that goal. I also think, other opportunities to integrate mental health into existing programs and initiatives that many of you are offering, leadership development, whether it's for existing leaders or for aspiring leaders, twofold. One is, the mental health support and resilience of leaders. I think it's 96% of senior leaders have experienced some level of burnout, a third which is extreme. And so to your point, Kalina, having mental health support be a part of the leadership development, they can experience it themselves. There's benefit for them, and it can help them draw on that personal experience when supporting their team members.
Awesome. All of those amazing suggestions. So thank you for that. We want to again sort of turn the focus a little bit to bringing the audience into the conversation a little bit. And so we have this question that came in from the audience that I'd like to pose to the panel. So it looks like a question from Jennifer. Unfortunately, there are negative stigmas around mental health and its discussion in the workplace for many employers. What is your number one strategy for opening this discussion within a company? So Kalina, can I turn that to you and ask you what strategies you would share?
Yeah, so I think a big one is making sure that you're gathering the right feedback from your employees. So I know we keep going back to the Starbucks, but just really finding a way to make sure everyone in the audience has been heard and that you're understanding what areas people need support in, because that's going to be different. And I'd say even a level deeper is if you are gathering that feedback, making sure you're mindful of where that feedback's coming from, both from a departmental standpoint, but also from different offices. Different locations might have different needs, and that can help you with programming as well as departments and training those managers. So I think that's really, really important. Another thing that I think is great is making sure that it actually ties into your values and who you are as a company. I always, before I meet with a client, I go to their website and I click on mission value. Almost every company has one. And it's always great, but sometimes you're not sure if that's an external value mission statement or internal. Sometimes it serves both ways, but I think oftentimes you will see how they service their customers and the type of company they want to be for the folks that they work with on the outside, when truly you do need an internal mission statement and values as well. So if your statement is, externally coming through for our customers no matter what, then you might want to consider announcing we come through for our people no matter what, and what that looks like, and really being able to put that into play. So I think embedding that into your culture, your values with the right feedback for the right people is really what you need to do.
I think that is really important. And I also think that we talk a lot about making sure the strategy is authentic. And so, connecting the initiative into your values, I think is one way to make sure that that happens. Carolyn, can you comment on some strategies that you would highlight for starting the conversation in the workplace?
Absolutely. I mean, Kalina, really great points there. Mental health is very personal. And I think that the delivery of mental health support for people needs to match how personal it is. And so, that can just starting with the basics, which we know is important for any engagement and any program, but your messaging, is it compassionate? Kalina, you mentioned storytelling. We focus on that a lot, is whether it's mental health education or, kind of things in people's toolkit to support their mental health, telling it through the lens of a human lens, a storytelling lens. And also as part of that education, just educating about the prevalence, that it's, it's when you hear about mental health support, it's not just for people with mental illness, it's actually across the continuum. And most of us fall, somewhere in the middle, and we all can really have, find benefit in mental health support and offerings. So, the messaging, I also lastly think about the people that your employees are working with every day. So whether that is their manager, their supervisor, if your wellbeing program has health coaches, we have human performance coaches, really leveraging those relationships as connectors. So making sure that the resources are known by your human performance coaching team or your health coaching team, so that if something comes up where it feels like that kind of elevated level of support might be helpful, they can know how to connect that person while they're also working, preventatively on the tools more upstream as well.
Yep, fantastic. So we've talked a couple of times about how mental health is really touching everybody, right, within the workplace. And so again, we want to kind of turn to the audience and bring the audience into the conversation. I have another poll question for you, and this one's really getting at this topic of diversity and inclusion. And so my question for you is, does your organization consider diversity and inclusion to be part of your mental health strategy? And again, this is a very simple yes or no option. So we'll give you a moment to respond to that question. And then, Colleen, I'll ask you to help me read the responses since I can't quite see that far.
Okay, so we have 59% said yes and 41% no.
Awesome. That's great. So for about 60% think of diversity and inclusion and mental health strategy as going sort of hand in hand. So I'm curious again to talk about this diversity related to the topic. Colleen, I'll turn to you again. Can you talk a little bit about how you see opportunities for employers to embrace diversity in mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my view, I think diversity and mental health are kind of intertwined. So while there are different strategies and things to think about in your diversity inclusion strategy, you need to be thinking about mental health, and in your mental health program, you need to be thinking about diversity. So they really do go hand in hand. We're hearing a lot about how, one of the biggest struggles is that people need to be able to bring their whole selves to work. And oftentimes, if it's not in a supportive culture, they don't feel that, which can be the biggest impact on mental stress of anything I could think of that we discussed before. Not feeling able to be themselves, share themselves, what they're going through, all of those. So I think it's really important when you're building one or the other strategy is to definitely do a call to action for the company to get everyone involved. I think there's two examples that I really love here. And so the first is when you're thinking about the programs you do or whatever it might be, is having some sort of committee that gets to be involved and have a say in that process. I had a client who was looking for a new vendor that was going to help, and they, instead of just having HR and the CFO decide, they made a panel. And so the final part of the RFP, it included all different types of people at their company. It included a mom, it included a dad, it included different members of different diversity groups. And it was really interesting to see the different feedback and responses that each person gave that maybe the single HR CFO wouldn't have thought of. And so that's really important. I would say the other is employee resource groups. So we're finding that to be much more prevalent at companies, which I think is so awesome. So really championing those groups to not just meet, but also pull them into your programming. So another example, going back to my awareness calendars month, is, if it's Pride Month or Black History Month, is really tapping on those groups to say, what would you want to do here? And what would be meaningful for you, instead of the assumption of what you think would be meaningful. And so I think that sort of feedback is really, really important.
And so, Carolyn, you had talked earlier about stigma. And so when you think about diversity, inclusion, mental health, stigma, how do you bring those pieces together?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's great that 60+% of people are thinking about mental health in their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. So that's great. In terms of mental health diversity and tackling stigmas, I think about how the measurement strategy can actually support that. And that's not the most flashy answer, but it's important because a lot of times the measurement strategy, it sets the tone for, okay, what is this program going to be addressing? And so by having a really holistic measurement strategy that doesn't just assess for risk, but actually assesses the whole person across the continuum. I know at Aduro we have partnered with Harvard School of Public Health on our flourishing index. And there's 6 pillars similar to Sequoia's, but really upfront, having the measurement strategy assess the whole person and meeting them where they are in their mental health, so that you can deliver programs that meet them wherever they are on that continuum, and for really in an inclusive way.
And I actually think measurement is a really exciting topic.
I know you do, Renee.
I do too.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of opportunities for different tools like the flourishing index to give you a different lens on how people are doing. So again, just kind of including the audience in the conversation a little bit more, we have another poll question that we'd like to ask you, and this is really helping us gauge some of the struggles that you face around developing a mental health strategy. So the question is, what feels most challenging around building a mental health strategy? And there's some options, closed-ended options there that you can choose from. So again, we'll pause just a moment to give you a chance to enter your response there. Choices are manager training, leadership support, cultural stigmas, aligning benefits, and limited benefits. Okay, so this is great as well. So it looks like the most endorsed or popular response is leadership support. And so we have talked about, a couple of strategies around how we can build more leadership support. And then the second is manager training. Is that what you're saying? Thank you for verifying my eyes there. And again, that's another topic that we've talked about quite a bit today, is just the importance of pulling in that management support. So I do think that one of the challenges is that managers don't often have the vocabulary to really bring that into the conversation. Carolyn, you want to talk a little bit about some strategies for addressing that specifically?
Yeah, yes. So I think historically, and less so now, but historically managers have been almost risk managers. How can we make sure that there isn't kind of a crisis on site? And we're seeing that society and organizations are beginning to really see the importance of the role of managers and supervisors to be a lot more than that. And so naturally, supporting managers and supervisors in being having the vocabulary, finding the words to have those types of conversations. We actually have a coach that's on site at one of our clients, and they are using it's makeitokay.org, the Make It Okay Foundation, to really help just open up the conversation in the workplace, right? With the goal of having it be an everyday conversation, how to kind of destigmatize mental health. And there's also the mental health first aid that I mentioned. Starbucks is using as well. So there's the how do I lean into those conversations, not as a counselor, but more as a support and a guider to resources. And then, in addition to having those conversations, it's important. That is absolutely a very important part of the equation. It's also how to talk about what, Kalina, to your point, what is the team environment that is supportive for, promoting mental health of employees. So how do I have, as a manager, those conversations with my team? And also, how do I know which levers I can pull to really make adjustments in that?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for sharing that. Those are great strategies. Just kind of looking at time, I want to move us on to our last topic that we have for today, which is really talking a little bit about the future of employee mental health. And so, Kalina, let me ask you this question. Again, trying to get really concrete here, what do you think are some concrete things that today and in the future of work that we can really do to support mental health diversity in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think the first is the big trend we're seeing is that it's not so much reactive care as it's turning into both preventative and ongoing. And so really thinking about your program through that lens, I think will change a lot of the mentalities of how you're approaching this. It's not just how do we have something in place when someone needs it, but how do we prevent it from getting to that point and really build that in. So a lot of what we talk about, and I'll kind of summarize it into three or just a few things. But the first, I would say is get feedback. Like definitely start by gathering the right feedback from your employees, as we talked about. And I meet clients all the time who say we're not a survey culture, we do too many surveys. So there's other forums. You can do focus groups, you can do anonymous polls, you could have a whiteboard in the kitchen, people just write something down. There's definitely different ways to get that. The second is just providing those resources, and again, providing both the preventative and the resources for when someone needs something, and using that marketing language to definitely destigmatize it and make it something that people can relate to. And then the other one, and this can be really tricky, probably do a whole other panel on this, but is to target the whole family. We find oftentimes a lot of people just give resources to the people at work, when really it's something that the whole family needs access to. So thinking about your communication strategy from the standpoint of how do we give things people can bring home? Can we get the email addresses of those people? Can we even reach their kids who might still be on their plans that are in college? Like all of that is very relevant. So I think that's important too. And then I would say the last two is just continue the dialogue, like make sure this is an ongoing part of your conversations. And then for any of you guys that do events, I think also integrating that into who you are as a company. So a huge trend I've seen at company conferences for their own clients and different sort of events is adding a mental health element into it. So adding a sticker to your badge that says who you identify with, or having a wall where people can share comments, or all of these things are kind of really growing, and I think show your own employees who you are as a company if you're also doing that externally.
Yeah, those are great ideas. Like a lot of different suggestions there that I think our audience can really make practical use of. One of the things that that Carolyn, you and I have talked about a lot before is just that there's also the moment of like really trying to like have that moment of recognition where something's changed and you might need that resource, right? Like it's not like you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're massively stressed out or anxious or anything like that. It tends to be just gradual things that are happening over time, and sometimes you don't notice that, where you are today is actually drastically different than maybe where you were a year ago, right? And so, Carolyn, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the strategies that you've been thinking about that really help bring awareness to sort of that moment where an individual or, manager or somebody can sort of recognize that something's changed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And we talk about detecting the signal. Goes back to, yes, it's part of the measurement strategy, but also in terms of the whole experience. How do we listen to somebody's experience, whether that is within their health and well-being program and initiative, maybe they are working with a coach, but how can we help to raise that awareness of that something has changed before it before it becomes, more of a extreme struggle. But how can we just raise that awareness for the individual, raise the awareness, but also pair it with, and here's how we can support you. And so detecting the signal, whether it be using technology and also the humans, the relationships in their life to call that out, raise that awareness and guide them when it's helpful.
Perfect. And can you share a little, so you mentioned a little bit about the flourishing index earlier. Can you share like a little bit of what you've learned, through that as an opportunity to get better insight into mental health?
Yep. So I guess I'll tee it up a little bit for those. I alluded to it earlier, but we have partnered with Harvard and their School of Public Health and the SHINE team in our well-being and flourishing assessments. And there are 6 dimensions, very aligned with Sequoia's, and we're finding some really interesting insights that I'm particularly, it's enlightening and empowering to have this type of data. So one is, how physical health actually isn't a very strong predictor of overall human flourishing, but what we have seen is mental health and kind of emotional well-being. And I think at a visceral level, that makes sense. But to see that in the data, it's really just highlights how important it is to have mental health, really weave throughout every health and well-being strategy, for all people in a really inclusive way, if the goal is to really elevate people's lives and help them flourish.
And And I think so that's actually the last question that I have for the panel, but it's actually kind of nice because I think it brings us full circle. You know, Kalina, you opened up by saying how mental health really isn't one thing. It's actually connected into all of these different areas of well-being, and Sequoia's really holistic view of that. And it's interesting that, you know, we're kind of closing out with that data point that actually shows that that's what we see in the data too, as we start to measure it, is it's not one thing. It's really part of everything that really leads to your ability to flourish and achieve, maximize your well-being. So fantastic. Thank you both. That was fantastic. I'm sure I'll have some questions for both of you as we get into Q&A as well. I have a couple of just wrap-up items that I want to make sure and hit on before we do move to those questions. So a few logistics. First of all, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about human flourishing and the flourishing index that Carolyn referenced, there's information here on your screen for how you can access that by going to adurolife.com /flourishing-index. And then we also had some questions that were part of the registration process, and that have been submitted, you know, as we've been talking today. And so I want to go to the first question that I see here in front of me, and that question is, what are the best strategies for a specific segment of the population? So that's non-desk manufacturing employees. And so, Kalina, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, and this is actually a really interesting one. I work with a construction company who has this exact, not issue, but challenge, opportunity that they have to face when it comes to getting the right information to these employees. And so again, going back to that communication strategy, I really think that is the most important. And in part of that, one thing that we actually did that might be a helpful example is we met with the office manager at each of those locations, or you could use it in this example, the manager of each of those teams, and really tried to get specific feedback about how they communicate to their own team, because no one's going to know a better way to get the attention of their team than their own manager, hopefully. And so we were finding that they were getting really creative with the ways that they were communicating things, everything from notes around the office to sometimes they said they would mail things home. They actually had an all team meeting that they held on Wednesdays that the HR person didn't even know about. And so those sorts of things are helpful to find the right avenue to communicate to them. So I think that's definitely important. In some cases, you can use technology, getting people's phone numbers and text, but for where that's not available, I think finding the right ways to make sure that it's at least going to their home, getting in their work cubbies if they have them, or things like that are really, really important. But again, it's meeting them where they're at. So I really look to the people who do manage those teams to help you in the communication strategy.
Yeah, is it okay if I add one thing? Is with frontline manufacturing populations, safety is a big business objective, and there's also opportunity. We had talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, also to make sure that mental health is a part of the safety strategy. So we're already seeing that employers are bringing health and well-being into their safety initiatives, acknowledging that those are important factors that can impact one's safety at work. But mental health is absolutely a really important layer to include. Upstream, proactively, stress, anxiety, depression, things that can result because of those things, substance abuse. And so making sure that mental health is a part of your safety trainings and also in the toolkit of managers and supervisors of frontline teams as well.
Perfect. So I heard aligning to strategies that are already working and tying it to other initiatives that are a priority for the organization.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so we have another question here. This question's from Stephanie. And the question is, what are some of the ways to enhance the mental health aspects of our well-being program offerings beyond the EAP?
Yeah, so I'll touch on this and then feel free to chime in. I think a lot of what we see is when you think about beyond the EAP, I assume it's because you're trying to do a lot of the other types of issues that come up that are stressors. And so what we usually think about when we think about what should be offered is what are even some of those positive stressors that people go through. So starting a family, buying a new home, maybe you even back to the management side, promote someone to a new level of responsibility, and that's something that is going to add another level of stress, though an exciting opportunity. And so when you look at a lot of those different things, whether it's through survey data or some of the life instances in or outside of the workplace that everyone's going through, it helps you kind of identify what are the main 5-10 topics maybe that we need to add to our programming. And so the first place I always say to start is definitely with the carriers that you have. I think a lot of people don't know all the ins and outs of their carriers, what's available to them, how employees are going to use them, kind of squeeze everything you can out of that. And then the second is, once you've identified those, is really looking to who are your best partners. So maybe if you're already working with Grow, it's them. Different local organizations who can help. I think it's really figuring out who your partners are and trying to develop a better strategy. I love when clients do a survey and share that data with their vendors. It seems obvious, but a lot of times it doesn't happen. And so making sure your vendor partners know what's going on in your company and see that data so they can really help tailor your program. It's one thing to just discuss on a call, and it's another for them to help kind of analyze. So I always suggest that is too, to help you find the right programs.
You only touched on it briefly, but I love that you're bringing in being aware of your local partners as well, which I think is a fantastic strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have, I think, one last question. So this question is from Janelle, and the question is, what are some tactics to get free resources into our employees' hands in an anonymous way? It's a tongue twister.
That is a tongue twister. You did well.
Which of you would like to take that one?
I'll start, and then you can. I mean, a lot is, Kalina mentioned earlier, a place where people know where to go on their own, kind of a self-serve. Hey, maybe they have the awareness that they need some support, that just they know where to go. Whether that is however you communicate already internally, definitely. Definitely integrating into other programs and initiatives that you already have underway. Where are people already going, and raise it to them there. So that would be through communication avenues. Also, I mentioned it earlier, but where are the relationships that an employee might be engaging with? Health coaching, human performance coaching. That is a confidential, trusted relationship that through that trusted relationship, some mental health struggles arise oftentimes, stress, anxiety. And so how can we make sure that your partner in that has the resources to be able to navigate and guide that person if that is something that the individual thinks would be supportive in their mental health?
Yeah, and I would just add, be relentless. Repetition is key with these things. And also, I think there's an easy way to shift from just providing the resource to adding it into a life event, a theme, kind of what we talked about with that. So a great example is if you have an intranet right now and you're just posting your EAP or a therapy flyer, you're probably not going to get too many clicks on that. But if you add the EAP into your leave policy programming, and you add that into your management training, and you add that into all of these different things, and then use those monthly themes like I talked about, like Mental Health Awareness Month or so on, and just make the EAP or whatever mental health resource you have part of every single thing that you do, it will get to people and it will have them find it, because they might not be looking for the EAP, they might just be looking for parenting resources, but the EAP should be in all of that.
Yeah. It feels like a theme really, through the thread of the conversations that we've had today is it really does need to be filtered through everything, right? Yeah. So they're seeing the opportunity, in many, many different ways to really meet them where they are, and also at the right time that they need it, because that might also be at a different time over the year. So being relentless, I think is a really, really good description of the strategy, the winning strategy keyword, for mental health. Yeah.
And across the continuum, not just resources for people with mental illness, but really the everyday stressors as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So this has been a fantastic conversation. Before we kind of close out the webinar, I just want to sincerely thank both of you for joining us today. It was fantastic. I'm sure we'll continue our conversation. In the meantime, I think we have a couple of closing comments for the audience members so that they can get on their way.
Thank you all again for joining us today. And for those of you who joined us for that recertification credit, that code is on the screen for you, so take note of that. And in efforts to continually offer you valuable content, please let us know what you thought in the follow-up survey that should pop up once we conclude the webinar. And for further information, check out our website, learn more about the Flourishing Index. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.